Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 3 of my story. If you haven't heard part 1 and part 2 of the story tonight, please click on the description because you don't want to miss out on the entire story. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and share this video with your friends because I'd be very grateful for that. So let's get started, shall we? I hasten to say it is a rather turnaround of events, isn't it? Given how Mrs. Weedle used to view the Woodgrove. So it is odd. But I suspect her young lover has persuaded her to think of the Woodgrove in a different manner. The trails, are regularly maintained, and it's very quiet and peaceful over there. You'd think that they'd prefer to go running in the local park around the lake, but not so. I would have certainly thought that that was more Mrs. Weedle's cup of tea. But no, they go running in the grove every day. And there's so many gnarled roots growing up through the ground there. It would be easy to fall over, but it seems Mrs. Weedle will do anything to accommodate her lover, over and above considering her own preferences, which could end up in the long term making her resent him, in my opinion. I can't wait to go there again, said Erin wistfully. In truth, I haven't thought about anything else since I've been away. After her mother had mentioned the Woodgrove. While I'm here, I intend to get up early in the morning and walk there every day, just like old times. Oh dear, said Erin's mother, sighing. You clearly haven't changed a bit, Erin. You better make sure you take your old rucksack with you when you go in there, along with your pepper canister and EpiPen. And I hope you won't be adverse to taking your cell phone with you. Are you still against using your cell phone? Or has London changed you in that regard and made you more tech-friendly? I'm afraid not, Mum. I'm still very adverse to technology overtaking our lives. I talk about it a lot at Oxford, and several university professors agree with me wholeheartedly. They say it's a very real danger that technology could one day take over our lives, and that the powers that be will use it to control our every move. I kid you not, Mum. When you're walking around in London, everywhere you go, I notice there are CCTV cameras monitoring my every move. It might help solve crimes and catch perpetrators, but I'm not sure this excessive over-the-top surveillance is good, with all the citizens being watched all the time. London is becoming like China, with this intensive surveillance. They just watch you like a hawk. Obviously I use my cell phone when needs must, but I hate the damn thing. I don't take it with me wherever I go. When I'm having a drink at a pub in Oxford, I just tend to leave it at home. It's liberating, let me tell you. Besides, if I need a cell phone, I can borrow somebody else's. Everywhere you look, someone's got a phone at their disposal, have they not? Oh dear, some things never change, said her mother, sighing gingerly. But as long as you keep yourself safe walking around the Woodgrove, that's all I care about. As long as you take care, that's all that matters as far as I'm concerned. Erin had been home for over 2 weeks now. She felt as if she'd never been away. The townsfolk had welcomed her back to North Carolina with open arms. Everyone wanted to know all about the last 5 years Erin had spent in Oxford. Erin had been in the bakery queue, hoping to buy some homemade cinnamon buns, some sesame bagels and some jam doughnuts to take home, when Mrs. Weedle came dashing up to her with her arms outstretched. She was so effusive that Erin lost her position in the queue. She found herself being purged out of the long line of people as they shuffled forwards and stole her former position. At first, when Erin saw the elegant pink flamingo dashing towards her hurriedly, leaving the side of a rather bemused-looking debonair young man, her first thoughts were, "Who the hell is that?" For it never occurred to her that this glamorous, demonstrative vision in pink was, in fact, Mrs. Weedle. Mrs. Weedle had flung her arms gregariously around Erin and given her an all-encompassing friendly hug, squeezing Erin so tightly that she almost lost her breath. For Mrs. Weedle, this idiosyncratic behaviour was incongruous for the former self-effacing demure woman. It was as if even the shrinking violet side of her personality had taken a back seat, overtaken by a zealous, rather bubbling enthusiasm, The woman had changed physically and emotionally, there was no doubt about that, and the dramatic shift was rather bewildering to Aaron. "Oh, Aaron, it is so good to see you. It has been such a long time. I can't believe you're back. I heard the rumours in town, but they're true. It is so good to see you." "I'm sorry," said Aaron, looking stupefied. "Do I know you?" "It's Glenys Weedle, my darling. Don't tell me you've already forgotten me. Has your time in Oxford made your memory expire? You can't have forgotten your old friend. No one in town has ever forgotten you, that's for sure. I was so hoping I'd run into you. I want you to tell me all about your time in Oxford. Your parents are desperately proud of you, going to such an illustrious university like that. You must be quite the boffin." "Oh, Mrs. Weedle, I didn't recognise you. You do look amazing. Your clothes, your hair, it's remarkable. I did hear you'd had a bit of a makeover, but you look like you've dropped years off your face. You look incredible. I'd never have recognised you in a million years, and if I'd been asked to put a wager on who in town had dyed their hair pink, you can bet your bottom dollar you'd be the last person I'd have guessed would do such a thing. But the pink hair, it's very becoming on you, I hasten to say." "Oh, you like it," said Mrs. Weedle coyly, touching her hair. "I'm so pleased you do. You know, I got so tired of the way I used to look. My mother kept telling me I was the most dreary dresser. She said to me, if you want to change your life, Glenys, stop looking so miserable. You need a makeover. I kicked up quite a storm, believe me, insisting I needed no such thing. She took me to someone who specialises in helping people reinvent themselves. A life coach, I believe it's called. His name was Claude Montel. He got me to take a long, hard look at myself, and then encouraged me to start dating. And, well, the rest is history. I had a whole makeover from head to toe." She lowered her voice. "I'm married now. You see that very delicious young man over there, looking rather bewildered as he's watching us? Well, isn't he gorgeous? He's my husband, and he's half my age. Aren't I a lucky lady? I think that is why I look so decidedly different. That's what love does to you, Aaron. I highly recommend it. My mother thinks I've become the quintessential butterfly. And you know what? I think I have. Everybody in town is telling me so." "You have, Mrs. Weedle, but a very stylish butterfly at that. It seems like this life coach of yours helped you transform your life exponentially. I've never seen you look so happy. It's not just the clothes. You're radiating so much joy. I'm very happy for you, Mrs. Weedle." "Thank you, my dear. It is so kind of you to say," said Mrs. Weedle, grabbing Aaron by the hand. "Now you've got to come with me. Let me introduce you to my other half. You're just going to love him, and I'm quite sure he's going to love you too." Aaron felt rather awkward and self-conscious as Mrs. Weedle pulled her towards the young man, whom looked as equally awkward to see Aaron as Aaron did to see him. Perhaps he could sense Aaron could see right through him, like a pane of translucent glass, and could perceive that Aaron was particularly discerning, and what she saw she didn't like at all. In a trice, Aaron had got the full measure of Rhys Daygard. She'd always been an exceptionally good judge of character, trusting her instincts all the time. Mrs. Weedle's husband made her nose twitch uncomfortably, and the underside of her hands itch, which always happened to her when she was grievously unsettled about a person she'd met. Yes, he was handsome enough, but his dark, soulless eyes avoided any deliberate eye contact with Aaron. Quite suddenly he bashfully put on his dark glasses, when they were not even standing in the sun, which was a red flag to Aaron. What was this man hiding? She could smell the guileful duplicity on him as strongly as the expensive aftershave he was wearing, that he had not applied very discreetly. You would likely smell him halfway down the street, and it was rudely overshadowing and interfering with the delicious smells of cinnamon and baked goods in the bakery. There was something disturbingly ambiguous about him that gave her the creeps and made every single hair on the back of her neck stand up on end. This tight-lipped, unforthcoming, furtive man did not wear his heart on his sleeve like most of the friendly townsfolk did. On the contrary, he appeared secretive, aloof, and insouciant, and he was not exactly friendly. He was over 6 foot tall, long and lean, with a chiselled face, high cheekbones, and a masculine square jawline. His facial symmetry was pretty close to perfect, and his olive skin looked as if it had soaked up weeks of leisurely sunshine somewhere exotic. He had broad shoulders, and was sporting very stylish, expensive gear, which Erin suspected was designer, and on his tanned wrist she couldn't help but notice he was wearing one of the most expensive watches she had ever beheld. A Philip Patek it was, and she knew it must have cost a fortune. And there was also a very expensive signet ring on his finger that looked as if the central stone was a blue sapphire. Erin privately wondered if Mrs. Weedle had brought her fancy man these lovely, very extravagant gifts. She already noticed the bright yellow Lamborghini that had been driving around town, which she had learnt Mrs. Weedle had brought for Rhys as a wedding present. The man certainly had expensive taste, and the Ralph Lauren sunglasses he was wearing, Erin thought that if she were to buy herself a pair like that, would completely decimate her bank account. "Sweetheart, I want to introduce you to Erin. You know I've been telling you all about her. She's the one that went to Oxford University for 5 years. She's back home here for 6 weeks. Isn't that exciting? I've been longing for you to meet her. She's a very good friend of mine." "It is very nice to meet you, Erin. My wife has told me all about you," he said, extending his hand to shake Erin's. When he held her hand, he did so a fraction too long for Erin's liking. He squeezed it so hard, she nearly cried out in agonizing pain. No one had ever shaken her hand like that before. She pulled it away in abject shock, and could swear she saw a sly little grin appearing on Rhys's face. She was certain the man had deliberately hurt her, as if squeezing her hand a tad too hard had brought him some kind of sick, rather macabre pleasure. No, she must have imagined that, surely. No one would set out to be that mean. "I believe congratulations are in order," said Erin, trying to sound polite, giving the man a watery smile. "Oh, thank you, Erin," said Mrs. Weedle, giggling. "We're very happy, aren't we, Rhys? We've been married for 6 months, you know, and I highly recommend married life. We're having a ball together, aren't we, Rhys?" "That we are," said Rhys. "Me and my wife are very much in love." The way he said this was as if he was rehearsing a line from a script that he needed to repeat, and his words were as flat as champagne that had lost its fizz. "No doubt all the gossips around town have probably fully informed you, Erin, about the age difference between the two of us. You know what people are like around here. They can't resist gossiping and having a good old chinwag at my expense," said Mrs. Weedle. "My life coach wasn't best pleased with me dating a much younger man like Rhys. He thought Rhys was after my money. Can you believe that? Some people are so sceptical and cynical about true love. But nothing could be further from the truth. And the age difference between the two of us doesn't matter a jot, does it, Rhys? We don't feel it at all. Do we, love?" "Of course it doesn't bother us, my love," said Rhys, picking up his wife's hand and kissing it adoringly. "Age is only a number." He turned around to fix his gaze on Erin, but she couldn't see the expression in his eyes, but she suspected he was glaring at her. "I'm so glad to hear it. I'm so happy for the both of you. Really I am," said Erin, her throat becoming thick with disgust. Everything about this blood-sucking leech of a man made her want to throw up. "I hope you don't mind. I need to get back into the queue. My dad is going to kill me if I don't return home with some of those cinnamon buns that he begged me to buy, and they look as if they're going down far too fast. It's really good to see you, Mrs. Weedle, looking so happy, I have to say." "Your father, my dear Erin, always did have a dreadful sweet tooth," laughed Mrs. Weedle. "I remember when we went to that wonderful place. What was it called? I can't remember. The Cavern, I think it was. Your father went up for dessert 5 times, would you believe it? We have a lot in common there. But then I have to say those cinnamon buns are to die for. I better get back into the queue myself before they sell out. You don't look like you eat any cinnamon buns, Mrs. Weedle. You've lost a ton of weight. You're looking really great. Oh, thank you, dear. I think I need you around, Aaron, to bolster my ego. It is so kind of you to say. I've taken up running, if you must know. I'm in quite good shape, unlike the olden days when I could only walk half a mile. Mrs. Weedle's brow furrowed. I do owe you an apology, Aaron. How so? Asked Aaron, raising an arched brow. Well, you know, I used to go on and on at you about the Woodgrove, didn't I? And how crazy and nonsensical you were to go running there, because you know of all the rumours and stuff. Well, you weren't alone, Mrs. Weedle. People were constantly telling me the place was haunted, and after the prostitute was murdered there, people were naturally on edge, so I don't blame you for having a go at me about that. Well, my dear, I go running there every morning, sometimes with Rhys, sometimes without him. When Rhys is out of town, then I go there on my own, and I love it there, and I don't think any of the rumours about the place are true. As Rhys says, a small town, well, they thrive on their ghost stories, don't they, that are designed to deliberately scare you. But as you so rightly said, Aaron, those woods are pretty benign. Nothing dangerous happens there, apart from the poor prostitute, of course. That was a very sad story. But as Rhys keeps pointing out, it could have happened anywhere. Aaron hugged Mrs. Weedle, told her how great it was to see her again, nodded politely at her husband, and was glad to seek refuge in the long queue of people at the bakery, all champing at the bit to get their hands on jelly doughnuts, cinnamon buns, or carrot cake, which were the best sellers at the shop. As she waited for her turn, she mumbled under her breath 4 words. He doesn't love her. And when she returned home, she expressed her misgivings to her mother. Oh, my darling, I am so glad to hear you say the same thing, said Aaron's mother. I do hate saying unkind things about people, because I really am very fond of Mrs. Weedle, and it's not in my nature to say mean things. But I am so glad you share my misgivings about Rhys. The man is a snake in the grass. I can assure you of that. Aaron shook her head disdainfully. It's more than that, Mum. I got the profound feeling that Mrs. Weedle's life is in danger with that man. There's something sinisterly dark about him. I don't know what it is, but he just gives me the creeps. He made my blood turn cold. Oh, my darling, I'm sure you're wrong about that. I think that all Rhys Daygard wants is Mrs. Weedle's bank account. Nothing less and nothing more. But you mark my words, he'll take her for every single penny she's got. It was on a prepossessing Friday morning, when Aaron climbed enthusiastically out of bed, as she had done like clockwork since she had returned home, sinking back ever so gratefully into the old routines that she had thoroughly enjoyed as a young girl. By all accounts, even though she got up early, she had never bumped into Mrs. Weedle going for a run, or her husband Rhys, which was quite a relief for her. Maybe Mrs. Weedle went running in the grove later in the morning. Aaron tried not to think of Mrs. Weedle, as an overwhelming feeling of foreboding would overcome her. Aaron had not forgotten about her encounter with the little Bigfoot and its mother all those years ago. But this was a secret Aaron had never shared with anyone, not even her own parents. But every time she went ambling into the Woodgrove, she'd think about the remarkable idiosyncratic creatures that she had encountered, and how she'd saved that adorable 4-foot Bigfoot's life with an EpiPen. She'd marvel over the chances of being at the right place at the right time, for her to save the creature. Little did Aaron know, when she got up that morning, that this was a day when a kind deed she had extended towards a young Bigfoot would be paid back in full, in ways she never envisaged possible. The morning was bright and beautiful. It was summer, and the tall, lofty oak trees along the pavement were covered in a plethora of leaves, so only faint slivers of pearly sunlight perforated the boughs and danced across the road. Aaron stepped up her pace. She had never wanted to run. You could see so much more when you walked at a speed. And recently in a health journal she had read that walkers outlived runners. That did not surprise her at all. For anything the book affirmed that stressed your body too much contributed to the aging process significantly, and that made perfect sense to her. Erin had the old rucksack that she'd been using since she was 10 years old. It had once belonged to her brother Bernard. It was now slung over her shoulders. It contained her EpiPen, a mobile phone that was switched off with all calls going to voicemail, and a pepper spray that had never ever been used. Soon Erin had reached the Woodgrove. She happily trudged up the undulating incline. She could smell the earthen soil beneath her boots, mingled with the fresh summer scent of flowers and woodsy smells that obviously came from the trees. In the beginning, the battered path was rudely invaded by gnarled-looking roots, but she navigated her way around these ropey landmines with relative ease, taking care not to get her boots entangled by an unsuspecting obscure trap. Soon the path became smoother, with some of the old mulch from the previous fall. Her feet kicked up all these old leaves, and her narrow shoulders pleasurably basked in the pleasant warmth of the soft showers of sunlight that trespassed through the boughs from the upper canopy, where sometimes glimpses of blue sky would peek at her sneakily through the trees. The forest floor was richly furnished with wide open umbrella-like ferns, shade-loving shrubs and flowers. There were occasional loose trunks of trees lying randomly on the side of the path, covered in moss and lichen. The quaint bird song filled the woodgrove with its pretty trills. All of a sudden, Erin heard a woman's frantic screams. "What the hell?" she thought. "What the hell is that?" Erin froze to the spot, unable to comprehend what had happened. The scream she had heard was not the same as the one she'd heard 8 years prior, when a little Bigfoot was stung by a bee. This was something altogether different. The silence that followed was more disturbing than if she'd heard several more frantic screams. Erin hurriedly opened her knapsack. She quickly removed the pepper spray, placing it in the pocket of her jeans for easy access. She searched the forest floor frantically for a large piece of timber that could be used as a makeshift defensive weapon. She ran towards the area where she'd heard the ominous scream. Not for a second did she consider her own safety, but she could sense danger, as if it clawed around her instincts like hundreds of crabs nipping at her insides. Erin found herself once again in the same familiar open meadow, or flatland if you like, where she'd seen the little Bigfoot before, and had hurriedly plunged the EpiPen into her arm. But this was not what she was seeing now. In abject disbelief and confoundment, she could see the distinctive figure of Rhys, Mrs. Weedle's husband, dragging something through the knee-high grass. She stood still for a moment, watching the formidable scene unfolding before her, as if caught up in the throes of a horrific movie. She held her breath as her chest tightened. What the hell was Rhys doing, she wondered. She knew he was up to no good. He was furtively looking around him, as if he knew that he could not afford to have any witnesses to his godless activities. When she looked closer, she let out an audible gasp that was so astonishingly loud that Rhys looked up in her direction, and then he saw her standing there, gawking at him. Rhys frowned when he realised his cover had been blown. He'd been dragging the body of Mrs. Weedle through the grass. She was wearing bright pink running gear with white trainers, and her pink hair was now clinging tightly to her face. It was in disarray. It looked as if it was congealed with blood, and by the looks of things she had been bludgeoned to death. There was blood all over her head, all kinds of scratch marks on her face, and her eyes were glazed over. It was in this tortuous moment that Erin's worst fears were fully realised. All her suspicions she had felt about Rhys were right on the money. The man was mentally unstable, clearly insane. He'd probably murdered Mrs. Weedle, and was trying to stage the event to make it look like an accident. Looking at the head lacerations, he probably wanted to make it look like a bear attack, so that he'd walk away with all of Mrs. Weedle's money. The snake in the grass had never loved Mrs. Weedle, as she had suspected all along. He now wanted to get his hands on all her money. As these uncomfortable thoughts whirled around in Erin's head, she realised in this moment that her life was in perilous danger. She needed to get away from this man fast. "What the hell have you done?" asked Erin. "What have you done to poor Mrs. Weedle?"
"What does it look like I've done?" said Rhys, giving her a large, malevolent grin.
I knew when I saw you that day in the bakery, that you weren't a good person. There was something so shifty about you," she said hurriedly. "I had a feeling from the very beginning, but I never imagined you were capable of this. Well, I thought you might be, but even my mother convinced me that it wasn't possible, that you were after her money. But to do this to her, what kind of a monster are you?"
"You think I was going to let that silly woman only give me half her family fortune, when all I needed to do was bludgeon her to death and inherit the bloody lot?"
"You are seriously sick. What is wrong with you? You are warped in the head. What are you, a psychopath or something? How could you kill such a gentle soul?"
"If you want to call me a psychopath, you can. If you mean, do I have feelings for my wife? Absolutely not. But I did fancy something. Her money. That was very attractive. You do realize you are going to be leaving this Woodgrove very definitely in the same way as Mrs. Weedle here. You won't be alive. You should have listened to your parents' advice when they warned you not to come to a place like this. What shall I tell the police? Ah, yes, you arranged to meet up with my wife for a walk in the Woodgrove. The two of you must have got beaten up by a bear. How very tragic," said Rhys Goddard, giving Aaron a satisfactory, triumphant smirk. "In fact, your fortuitous arrival in the Woodgrove is awfully convenient for me. It makes my story all the more credible."
"You won't get away with this," said Aaron, waving the piece of timber warningly in her hands. She turned around and began to run through the trees as fast as she could to get away from Rhys. But her legs were crumbling beneath her. She couldn't believe that this was actually happening. It was all so surreal. But the thundering of her heart propelled her ever forward, reminding her that she was unlikely to escape out of here alive. Her eyes had seen far too much. Rhys fired some gunshots after her randomly. He was just trying to scare her. But he wasn't going to shoot her, she told herself. He needs to make it look like a bear attack. Now, for God's sake, Aaron, run, because he is going to kill you. Aaron was fit, but she was no match for Rhys. Not only was he stronger than her, but he could run reasonably fast. Aaron realized he was right behind her. He was catching up speedily. He was carrying a rifle which he would use against her if his plans to beat her up went awry. "Oh, please, God!" Aaron cried out. "Please, God, help me! I don't want to die!" Rhys's breathing was close behind her. She could feel his vaporous warm breath on the back of her neck. Her mind was screaming, "Run! Run, Aaron, run!" But her legs were not obliging. They weren't moving any faster. And then a gnarled root in the ground tripped her up, and she went tumbling, landing flat on her face. She stumbled awkwardly to her feet, and then there he was, staring down at her, with his soulless dark eyes, and a gormless grin on his face. And in his hands, the back of his rifle, was about to bludgeon her to death. "Not so fast, Aaron. I think you're like a cornered animal, don't you? You've got nowhere to run, girl. Did I not say you will not be leaving this Woodgrove alive? What a dreadful pity. Still, it can't be helped, can it? If you hadn't put your meddlesome nose into my business, none of this would have happened." "No, please, Rhys, don't do this," begged Aaron. I won't tell anyone about what you did to Mrs. Weedle. I never saw anything. I won't breathe a word about this to anyone. I'll back up your claims. I'll say I saw a bear standing over her. Please don't kill me." Rhys smirked. "You're not very bright, are you, Aaron? You went to Oxford University. What a joke. You think I'd let you live after what you've witnessed today? You must think I'm a simpleton. Any last words for your family?" he said, standing over her, with the back of his rifle at the ready. That was when Aaron saw a familiar face. one she hadn't seen in 8 whole years, peeking at her from behind the trees. It was a very large-looking Bigfoot, one she recognized, but it was all grown up. The last time Erin had seen her, she had only been 4 foot tall, and she'd stabbed an EpiPen in the creature's arm, and Erin had a profound sense that her Bigfoot friend was here to help. "Look behind you, Rhys! There's a Bigfoot over there! She's going to kill you! Watch out!"
"Is that the best you can do, Erin? Nice try," said Rhys, laughing. "Bigfoot, my God! You call yourself clever. Oh, my God, I'm really scared, Erin. There's a Bigfoot behind me," he said sarcastically. The next thing that transpired is all but a blur in Erin's memory, but she did recall the Bigfoot grabbing Rhys by the arm, pulling him away from her, throwing him off balance so he fell to the ground rather precariously, and his rifle went sliding away from him. And when he turned around to look up at the Bigfoot, he let out a scream. Erin remembered how his eyes grew wide in astonishment, his mouth dropping open, but his entire body began to quiver and shake in fear. "He tried to kill me," said Erin to the Bigfoot. Her words were enough to persuade the Bigfoot that this was a bad apple indeed, that needed to be eliminated, for it was as if Erin's words had been clearly understood. The Bigfoot stood over the body of Rhys, with both her powerful legs on either side of his body, her face staring down at him defiantly. She looked so human, but she growled furiously at Rhys, showing him a mouthful of teeth, and Rhys screamed again. It was over quickly for him, for with one powerful kick in the face, his entire neck snapped. He lay there motionless in the ground, and Erin found herself staring at the Bigfoot with such gratitude on her face. You saved my life," she said to the Bigfoot. "He tried to kill me. He's already killed his wife. She's lying dead over there, further along the way." The female looked down at the body of Rhys, and then up at Erin. She spoke to Erin in her strange language. "Gelati quasi, holotoboka. You saved me, remember, from the bee all those years ago. Kilati quasa, hiloto. I've never forgotten your kindness." But how did you know I needed help?" "Kilati quasa, homoli kasi, ilina quosolosha, fakilati." "I didn't know. My mother told me you were back again in the Woodgrove. She saw you walking in the woods yesterday. She told me you were around. I wanted to see you for myself. I've never forgotten your kindness. And when I saw this horrible man standing over you, I knew at once you were in trouble. I heard his thoughts, you see. He was saying he wanted to kill you." "You heard his thoughts?" "Kilati quasi, moto latina, ila cosa kisha, ila ka fakinikatiliamo, tali quasan." "I always hear thoughts. They're as audible to me as the spoken word. My mother would be impressed I killed something this sizable. I usually kill squirrels and small animals to eat. I hate killing of any kind, but I need the protein, so I haven't got much choice in the matter. But I prefer to eat nuts and acorns when they're around. But no, I'm not sad I killed him." "You're not?" asked Erin. "Oh, absolutely not. He's rotten to the core." "Can you see he's rotten?" asked Erin curiously. "Oh, yes. His energy is black. Motaliki, notola." "That's what I thought," said Erin. Erin remembers the magical moment when she hugged her very large Bigfoot friend, like she'd done all those years ago, when the creature was only 4 foot tall, and she'd stabbed an EpiPen into her arms to save her life. It was so lovely to hold her again, although this time she was the one that felt like a fragile doll in the Bigfoot's arms. They held each other for a long time, and then finally Erin reluctantly let go. "Yukolotana, kila sikwasa. You'll be all right?" the Bigfoot asked her. "You're very shocked." She gave Erin a selection of leaves to chew that she claimed would steady her nerves. "Kilani kasi, holonapa, ilaki kosa. If you're ever in trouble again, when you come into the Woodgrove, just call my name out, and I will come at once." "What is your name?" asked Erin. "Kilana wakosa. It means songbird." "Really?" asked Erin. "Why would your parents call you that?" Wakosa began to whistle, and it sounded like she was a bird.
"That's incredible," said Erin. "How did you do that?" "Because my name is Wakosa," said the Bigfoot. "That's why I do that." When the body of both Rhys and Mrs. Weedle were discovered, Erin decided to say nothing about the events of that inauspicious day. She didn't want the local people to label Mrs. Weedle a fool for believing that Rhys had loved her. She wanted to protect her friend's dignity. So instead she let the locals believe that 2 runners in the Woodgrove had ended up pursued by an angry mother bear, who felt threatened and had attacked the both of them. "Poor Mrs. Weedle and poor Rhys," the townsfolk would say. "The couple was so desperately in love. And to be attacked like this, how absolutely frightful." Erin did finally return to North Carolina to settle there permanently. She now lives in the old family home and is married with 3 children of her own. She has seen her Bigfoot friend on a few occasions, and when they meet, they always hug each other. She often hears her Bigfoot friend whistling happily in the Woodgrove. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, isn't that the most incredible story? I loved every minute of it from beginning to end, and I just loved how Erin saved a Bigfoot's life, and in the end, that little Bigfoot, who had grown up into a fully grown Bigfoot, saved her life from a very evil man. How very sad about poor Mrs. Weedle. It can be so easy to be taken in by someone whose intentions are just duplicitous in every sense of the word. How sad that she had to die like that. But in the end, good triumphed over evil. Until next time, goodbye and good night.